For the first time in years, the power balance in the West Houston metro is shifting. Some areas are still red hot and others are slowing down fast. And depending on the situation, you're either walking in with all the leverage or you're still gonna have to compete. So why does our market here in Houston look so different from the national headlines? And what do you need to know if you're looking to make a move? Hi, my name is Carolyn Bauerschlag, your friendly neighborhood realtor right here in the Houston area, and I've helped hundreds of people just like you relocate from all over our country right to our great city. And if you're thinking about moving to the area, I would love to add you to our client family. The key difference behind the shift in the power balance from seller to buyer all has to do with inventory. In Houston in 2025, we saw the number of homes available for sale go above 60,000 homes. Now, for reference, for most of the last pre-COVID years, that number was somewhere between 35 and 38,000 homes. And unfortunately, we set a record in 2025 for the number of homes that were available for sale. We also got the dubious distinction of being one of the most saturated markets in the entire U.S. Now, this is nothing that any seller really wants to deal with, but what this did bring about was a lot of choice for the buyer, hence the shift from seller to buyer in this power balance. Now, gone are the days of sellers being able to list their home for any price they want and buyers lining up down the street, but something strange did happen from time to time. Now, you may have gotten yourself caught up in a situation or heard a friend tell you about a story where even though all of these homes were on the market, they wound up in a multiple offer situation. And this was largely true. What we've seen in this market in the last year is that buyers are still out in full force, but they are extraordinarily discerning. And that makes sense to me. As we ended in 2025, we had 20% more homes on the market than we did even just 1 year prior. So what that does is it puts the buyer in the driver's seat for plenty of choice. Now, a well-priced home in a highly desirable area with features and updates that a buyer wants with the structural mechanicals that are in excellent shape is attractive to everyone. So from time to time, buyers would find themselves suddenly in a multiple offer situation. And if you didn't have a real estate agent who was paying attention, or if you weren't willing to make the changes and adjustments to your plan that were necessary, you could have very well gotten yourself stuck in the mud. So very much we're living in this tale of two markets here in Houston, which is some homes are overpriced from the jump. Some homes are in an area that are potentially not as desirable as others. And some are evergreen favorites where no matter what happens in the greater or West Houston area, buyers are going to flock to them time and time again. Houston is a collection of tons of micro markets, and knowing the difference between them is absolutely critical. If your agent hasn't pointed them out to you, I know an agent who can help you do just that. So what's a seller to do in this power shift? The number one thing that a seller can do to help themselves is not overprice their home. Now, here's what's strange. Most people think that if you price a home at a certain price, that you're naturally going to be negotiated against, and so it's in your best interest to list high and wait for buyers to throw a deal at you that you can tolerate. But the conundrum here is that by listing high, you are going to end up sticking yourself almost assuredly on the market for far longer than you need to. And the tricky thing about this is that you really only have about 2 weeks to make a positive impression on the greater buyer pool. Now, what I mean by that is that buyers are highly educated. They're walking around with tons of information in the palm of their hand, and they often come to me telling me, Carolyn, hey, I think this house is overpriced or there's something wrong with this one, because they're looking at the relative data that's easily and readily available to them in the palm of their hand. Now, as a seller, it may sound strange to you to consider that you really only have 2 weeks to make a positive impression, but here's what we know. Is that if you had 10 showings on your house and you had no offers, that would be a clear indication that the market thinks that you're overpriced. Or if you were on the market for 10 days but you had no showings, that would be another indication that you were overpriced. And really, even if it's 2 weeks, maybe even 3 that you're on the market and a buyer hasn't come to you, that's another indication that we have probably missed the mark. Now, what's interesting to me is that in any market, what we've noticed is that you can be about 1 or 2 percentage points incorrect and still generate interest from a buyer. So regardless of seasonality, regardless of interest rates that very day, if you are on the market 2 to 3 weeks and you haven't gotten what you're looking for, it may be time for you as a seller to rethink your strategy. The best advice that I can give anyone in this market is to make sure that as we muddy through all of this excess inventory, is that you as a seller listen to your agent And if you can't only listen to your agent, make sure that you listen quickly to the market signals that you're being given. Now, another strange phenomenon that we saw over 2025 and are expecting to see at least through part of 2026 is that new construction in many cases is less expensive than resale. Now, this is counterintuitive. Why would something that's brand new with a new roof, new AC, good-looking finishes be less expensive than resale? And the reality of it is that builders put a ton of inventory on the ground. Now remember that generally new construction is about 18 to 24 months behind whatever the current economic condition is. So the decision to put homes on the ground in 2025 was something that was probably decided in 2023. That's enough time for the landscape to look entirely different. But when those builders have homes that are complete, it is in their best interest to get rid of them and to get rid of them quickly. So what we see these builders do is according to whatever economic winds are blowing, they will cut their price. They will offer financing incentives so that your interest rate is low. They will throw incredible amounts of money towards your closing costs so that you lessen the amount that you have to bring to the closing table. And those tactics are simply things that sellers can't necessarily compete on. The only way a seller can really even begin to compete with that many incentives is to lower their own price. So therein lies the oddity in our market, is why resale might actually have to be less expensive than it normally would be, and why new construction says, whatever resale's doing, I'm going to continue to undercut it. That new construction builder simply has more margin and more financial capability than your typical resale seller. And another oddity that we're seeing in this market that's key in shifting the power balance from the sellers to the buyers is that we're seeing contracts bust out at a higher frequency. Now, it takes a lot to finally get a buyer and to get them under contract. And if you're a resale seller, you want to do whatever you can to keep that buyer on the line. So if you're a willing seller, you might be ultimately confused as to why a buyer doesn't seem collaborative. And the answer is two things. The first is that the buyer has incredible choice. It may very well be that in the 7 or 8 days that you've been under contract, something else catches their eye and they just choose to pursue that instead. And that's a real heartbreak. But another thing to consider is that buyers are extraordinarily price sensitive, and this is foreign to some sellers' ears. Now, what you as a seller might think is a minor repair or a simple fix or a small amount of money that would be needed to paint a wall or replace some floors is in fact to a buyer a near impossibility. They have allocated so much of their monthly income towards paying for their monthly payment in the form of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance that the normal amounts of savings that they could have to pursue simple repairs or minor upgrades are simply off the table. They don't have the money to do it because that money's been allocated towards their payments, right? So what we see is that when sellers even begin to flinch at compromising with a buyer during their inspection period, that buyer says, hey, you know what? I don't have the money to be able to fix this, and there's someone else down the street, almost literally, who's probably more willing to negotiate. So the best advice that we can give you as a seller as you edge in towards 2026 is to be mindful of the amount of choice that a buyer has. So with all of these nuances and microcosms and tiny markets all within the greater Houston area, what do? The first thing is that you hire your qualified and friendly neighborhood realtor to help you sort all of this information. And if you're a buyer, what I would do is I would target any home that's been on the market for longer than 30 days. Those are sellers who are primed for taking a price adjustment on their home, and you might very well get a set of circumstances that could be agreeable to you. And if you're a seller, what I would strongly encourage you to consider is to remember the amount of choice that a buyer has and to pay attention to the market signals that are directly in front of you. Buyers are exacting on price and condition, not just to be rude or punitive or mean, but because they don't really have the money to be able to afford or handle any changes or repairs. So in a city that's full of a ton of micro markets and nuances that change from block to block, what do? You hire your friendly neighborhood realtor who understands these differences and can help you put yourself in the shoes of the other party. So many of the issues that we see come up in our market have nothing to do with the deal itself, but the way that people feel about it. So we call that the psychology of the deal. And what we ask you to do is to consider both sides of the equation so that both buyer and seller can get across the finish line and find the right house for them. If you're thinking about moving to the West Houston area, make sure to reach out to me with my phone number and email listed below. And if you found value in the content that we put out today, make sure to click the link below and subscribe because we put videos like this out every single week. See you soon.